The stench of Xylo's market hit Kalen before he even stepped through the entry arch. A noxious blend of alien spices, engine exhaust, and the mingled body odors of a dozen different species hung in the air like a physical presence. He pulled his breathing filter higher over his nose and mouth, though the thin fabric did little to ward off the assault. Xylos sprawled across the surface of Krell, a border planet so far from central governance that even the concept of law seemed like a quaint suggestion. Here, at the edges of known space, only power, credits, and connections mattered. Smugglers and bounty hunters mingled with merchants hawking wares that would be illegal in any civilized system. Kalen kept his hand close to the concealed pulse gun strapped to his thigh, a habit from his mercenary days that had saved his life more than once. He mentally reviewed his objective: locate a specific artifact for his anonymous client. A pre-collapsed data core, supposedly containing information about extinct alien technologies. Not exactly legal, but not the worst job he'd taken since leaving military service. The payment promised would keep him flying for months without having to take another contract. As he navigated the crowded thoroughfare, Kalen's trained eyes cataloged threats and escape routes. 3 Vordian pirates by the weapons stall, best avoided given their tendency to start fights for entertainment. A pair of Silex enforcers likely collecting protection money. Nothing immediately dangerous, but the atmosphere of barely contained violence was ever present. Kalen turned down a narrower alley, following his information to a section that dealt in biological curiosities. This area grew even more chaotic, filled with cages of exotic creatures, and even a few sapient beings. Slavery might be outlawed in Galactic Central, but Krell operated by different rules. That's when he saw her. At first, his brain didn't fully process what he was seeing. In a filthy corner between stalls, partially hidden by stacked shipping crates, a female figure huddled on the ground. Her pale blue scales caught what little light filtered into the alley. She was entirely naked, her slender body curled into itself, as if trying to disappear. Kalen paused, his mission momentarily forgotten. She was Xylotian. Ironic, given the market's name, though they were rarely seen this far from their homeworld. Her scales, which should have been vibrant blue, had dulled to a grayish hue that Kalen recognized as a sign of extreme distress or illness in her species. "Move along, human," growled a reptilian merchant nearby. "That one's damaged goods. Not worth your time." Kalen didn't immediately respond, his attention caught by something unexpected, a faint pattern on the Xylotian woman's shoulder. Even in the poor light, he could make out a sequence of symbols that triggered his archaeologist's memory. Ancient Xylotian script. Some called it soul writing, believed to be tied to their species' lost golden age before the collapse. "What happened to her?" Kalen asked, keeping his voice neutral despite the disgust rising in his throat. The merchant shrugged multiple shoulders. "Found her in a derelict transport. No identification, no translator, no credits. Won't speak, won't eat much. Tried selling her to the pleasure houses, but she fought too much." He spat on the ground. "Not worth the feed I've wasted. Take her for 50 credits if you want exotic meat." Kalen's hand twitched toward his weapon before he forced it still. 50 credits? For a sapient being? 40 then, the merchant countered, misunderstanding. "Just want to clear the space." The woman's amber eyes had opened during this exchange, watching Kalen with a mixture of fear and something else, a defiance that hadn't yet been extinguished despite her circumstances. Their gazes locked, and in that moment, Kalen felt something shift inside him. He'd walked away from too many people who needed help during the war. Nightmares of those he couldn't save still haunted him most nights. 25, Kalen said, "And you throw in that blanket." He nodded toward a relatively clean cloth draped over an empty cage. Minutes later, Kalen led the Xylotian woman through the market. He'd wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, though she held it closed with such a tight grip that her knuckles had paled to almost white. She followed him silently, flinching whenever anyone came too close. Kalen rented a small room above a bar called the Broken Thruster, a dingy establishment that asked no questions as long as credits changed hands. The room was barely large enough for a bed, a small cleansing unit, and a chair, but it had a functioning lock and security scanner. Luxuries on Krell. "You're safe here," Kalen said after securing the door. He kept his distance, giving her space. "My name is Kalen. I won't hurt you." The Xylashian woman remained by the door, her back pressed against the wall, amber eyes tracking his every movement. Kalen opened his pack and pulled out a spare shirt and pants. "These will be too big, but they're clean." He placed them on the bed and stepped back. "There's a cleansing unit if you want to use it." He pointed to the small alcove. She didn't move. Kalen sighed and sat in the chair, maintaining distance. "I don't know if you understand me. I have a basic translator, but it might not have your dialect." He pulled out a small device and adjusted settings. "What's your name?" No response. "Are you hungry?" He reached slowly into his pack and removed a ration bar, breaking off a piece and eating it himself before offering the rest to her. After a long moment of hesitation, hunger won out, and she quickly snatched it from his outstretched hand. As she ate, Kalen observed the markings on her shoulder more carefully. He'd studied ancient Xylashian artifacts during his academic years before the war pulled him into military service. If he was right, those symbols were connected to the legendary Guardian clans, keepers of biological knowledge, so advanced it bordered on mythical. "Those markings," he said, pointing carefully to her shoulder. "They're old, very old. Do you know what they mean?" At the mention of the markings, the woman's hand instinctively covered them, and her scales shifted slightly darker, a sign of fear or protective instinct. "It's okay," Kalen said, raising his hands. "Just curious. I used to study such things." He didn't push further. Instead, he stood slowly and pointed to the bed. "You sleep there. I'll take the floor." He pulled a sleeping roll from his pack. "Tomorrow we can figure out next steps." The woman watched him prepare his makeshift bed on the floor near the door, positioning himself between her and any potential threat from outside, a detail she seemed to notice. As Kalen settled down, he saw her scales lighten fractionally toward their natural blue, the first positive sign since he'd found her. Hours later, after he pretended to sleep, she finally moved from her position by the wall, carefully took the clothes he'd offered, and slipped into the cleansing unit. When she emerged, wearing his oversized clothes with the sleeves rolled up, she silently made her way to the bed and perched on its edge, still watching him through the darkness. Kalen kept his breathing steady, giving her the privacy of believing him asleep. Whatever had happened to her, whatever she was running from or had been taken from, had left deep scars. Trust would come slowly, if at all. In the morning, he'd try again with the translator. For now, providing safety was enough. 3 days passed in the small room above the broken thruster. Kalen maintained his regular routine, going out to gather supplies and information, leaving food and water for the Xylashian woman, and giving her space whenever possible in the confined quarters. On the second day, she had allowed him to check a wound on her arm, revealing a deep gash that was healing poorly. Kalen had cleaned and treated it with his field medkit, maintaining a professional demeanor despite her obvious discomfort at being touched. By the third evening, Kalen had managed to adjust his translator to pick up rudimentary Xylashian speech patterns. The woman still spoke little, but occasionally whispered words in her native tongue that the device struggled to interpret. "Home," "lost," was the first phrase it managed to translate clearly, spoken while she stared out the small, grimy window. "You're home," Kalen asked gently. "What happened to it?" Her scales darkened momentarily before she turned away. Kalen didn't press. Instead, he shared information about himself, his former academic life studying archaeological artifacts, his reluctant military service during the hegemony conflicts, and his current work recovering rare objects for clients. He wasn't sure how much she understood, but speaking filled the uncomfortable silence. That night, as Kalen reviewed data on his portable terminal, searching for information about the artifact he'd originally come to find, the woman suddenly spoke. "Alara." Kalen looked up, surprised. "What?" "My name," she said haltingly, the translator converting her musical language into standard speech. "I am Alara." "Alara," Kalen repeated, offering a small smile. "It's good to meet you properly." That small breakthrough seemed to open something in her. Though still guarded, Alara began to communicate more. Brief phrases, single words, sometimes complemented by the color shifts in her scales that were part of Xyloshan nonverbal communication. Piecing together her fragmented story, Kaelin learned that Alara had been separated from her clan during what she called the Burning, possibly an attack or natural disaster. She'd been found unconscious by scavengers who sold her to a series of increasingly brutal owners before she ended up in Xylo's market. What became increasingly clear was that Alara wasn't just any Xyloshan. The markings on her shoulder identified her as a member of the Enlevi clan, biological archivists who, according to legend, carried within their genetic code the keys to ancient knowledge. These marks, Kaelin said carefully one evening, pointing to her shoulder, they're from Enlevi, aren't they? Alara's scales rippled with surprise. You know this name? I studied Xyloshan culture before. He gestured vaguely. Your people were the keepers of the great library. Not books or data, but biological knowledge encoded in your DNA. Alara was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Last of my line, she said softly. Others, taken or dead. The realization struck Kaelin like a physical blow. If she was indeed the last of her lineage, Alara carried within her not just her personal trauma, but the final remnants of an entire cultural heritage. The markings weren't just decorative. They were a map, a key to accessing information stored within her genetic structure. No wonder she'd been treated as merchandise. To the right buyer, or the wrong one, she would be priceless. Kaelin's original mission now seemed trivial by comparison. Whatever ancient data core he'd been sent to find couldn't compare to the living repository sitting across from him. He made a decision in that moment that would irrevocably change his carefully isolated existence. I'm going to help you, he said firmly. Not just to get off this planet, but to find safety. Permanent safety. For the first time since he'd found her, Alara's scales brightened to a vibrant blue, hope visible in the color shift. But the moment was short-lived as a sudden pounding on the door made them both freeze. Inspection, bellowed a harsh voice. Open up by order of station security. Kaelin's eyes met Alara's, both recognizing the lie. Krell had no real security force, just thugs collecting bribes and enforcing the will of whoever paid the most. Someone had found them. Hide, Kaelin whispered, reaching for his weapon. The relative peace Kaelin had established with Alara shattered as the pounding on the door intensified. She moved with surprising quickness, sliding beneath the bed as Kaelin positioned himself behind the door, pulse gun ready. Last warning before we blast the lock, came the voice. Station security has no jurisdiction in private residences under Krell Accord Section 12. Kaelin called back, buying time. Present your credentials through the scanner. A moment of confused silence followed. Few people on Krell actually knew the local regulations that existed mostly on paper. Kaelin used the distraction to activate his portable terminal, triggering an emergency protocol that would wipe sensitive data and send a distress signal to his ship. We have reports of harboring stolen property, the voice finally replied. Open up now. I'll open on visual confirmation of your identity, Kaelin countered. Instead of a response, a beam of energy sizzled through the door lock. Kaelin stepped back, weapon raised, as the door slid partially open. A armored figure pushed through. Not station security, but a professional mercenary in tactical gear. Kaelin fired without hesitation, catching the intruder in the shoulder and sending them stumbling back. Alara, window, Kaelin shouted, continuing to fire covering shots through the doorway. She emerged from under the bed and darted to the small window, pushing it open as Kaelin backed toward her, maintaining suppressive fire. Two more armored figures appeared at the doorway, these wielding more serious weaponry. Energy blasts scorched the wall near Kaelin's head. Jump, he urged. It's only one level. Alara hesitated only briefly before slipping through the window. Kaelin fired a final volley, grabbed his ready pack with essential supplies, and followed her out the window. They landed in a narrow service alley behind the broken thruster, the impact jarring but not injurious. This way, Kaelin said, grabbing Alara's hand and pulling her down the alley. We need to reach the spaceport. They ran through the twisting back passages of Xylos, Kalen leading them on a deliberately confusing route to throw off pursuit. Alara kept pace despite her recent mistreatment, her survival instincts evidently well-honed. "Who are they?" she gasped as they paused in a shadowy alcove. "Professional hunters," Kalen replied grimly. "Not local thugs. Someone with resources wants you badly." "The collectors," Alara whispered, her scales turning an ashen gray. "The who?" "Those who hunt knowledge, who take and break to learn." Her hand moved protectively to the markings on her shoulder. Kalen frowned, processing this new information. He'd heard whispers of an organization that sought out rare biological specimens and ancient technologies, supposedly for research, but with no ethical boundaries. If they were after Alara for the knowledge encoded in her genetics. "My ship is docked in the secondary port," he said. "If we can reach it, we can break atmosphere before they organize a full search." They continued moving through the market's underside, service corridors, waste disposal areas, and the cramped spaces between structures where the countless temporary stalls attached to more permanent buildings. Twice they had to hide as search parties passed by, their pursuers growing more numerous and methodical. As they approached the less reputable of Krell's two spaceports, Kalen's comm unit buzzed with an incoming transmission. He hesitated before answering. It could be traced, but the sender code indicated his main client contact. "Now's not a great time," he muttered into the device. "You've abandoned the primary objective." The voice was artificially modulated, unidentifiable. Complications arose. "I'll need to reschedule. The woman you've taken poses a risk to security protocols. Return her to the market authorities and resume your contracted mission." Kalen froze, sudden understanding dawning. "You're working with them." "The collectors. We have mutual interests in preserving certain knowledge." "The Xyloshan specimen." "Her name is Alara," Kalen snapped. "And she's not a specimen. She is the last viable genetic repository of Xyloshan biotech. The information she carries could shift the balance of power across 3 sectors." "You're a professional, Kalen. Calculate the risk-reward ratio here." Alara watched him with wide amber eyes, her scales flickering between colors as she read his expression. "Contract terminated," Kalen said flatly, and crushed the comm unit under his boot. "They want me," Alara said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but they'll have to go through me first." He checked his weapons charge, nearly depleted after the firefight. "Change of plans. My ship is probably being watched now. Then we are trapped." Her scales darkened again. "Not necessarily. I know someone who might help, but..." Kalen hesitated. "It means trusting someone else with your existence, and it's not without risk." Alara straightened, her natural height nearly matching Kalen's. "I trust you," she said simply. Those 3 words carried a weight that Kalen felt in his chest. How long had it been since anyone had trusted him? Since he'd allowed anyone close enough to have the option? "This way," he said softly, leading them away from the spaceport toward one of the permanent residential sections of Xylos. Mira Osei had been Kalen's intelligence contact during the war. After the peace accords, she'd set up shop on Krell, officially as an information broker, unofficially as a key node in a network helping people disappear who needed to start over. Kalen had never used her services himself, but he'd sent a few deserving souls her way over the years. Her shop front, a legitimate data repair business, was closed when they arrived, but Kalen knew the real entrance was in the back alley. A complex knot pattern later, they were ushered inside by a small security drone. 6 years without a visit, and now you show up with collector hunters on your tail, came a voice from the shadows. Mira stepped into the light, her dark skin contrasting with silver-white hair that hadn't been that color during the war. Implants glinted along her temples, marking her as someone who dealt in direct neural data transfer. "You never come just to say hello." "It's good to see you too, Mira," Kalen said with genuine warmth. "We need help." Myra's cybernetically enhanced eyes scanned Alara, lingering on the markings visible at the neckline of the oversized shirt she wore. "On Levi," she breathed. "They're supposed to be extinct." "This is Alara," Kalen said pointedly. and she needs to disappear. Myra's expression shifted to business-like efficiency. Collectors involved already means high-level resources deployed. Facial recognition will be scanning every public space in Xylos within hours, if it isn't already. She pointed to a secure room off her main workshop. Get in there. Complete signal dampening. I need to make calls. In the small room, Ilera finally spoke. Your friend. She knows of my people. Mira knows a little about everything, Kalen replied. That's how she stayed alive so long. And you? Why do you risk for me? Ilera's amber eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. The one who called, they offered you something for me. Kalen sighed, running a hand through his short hair. During the war, I made choices. I followed orders that I shouldn't have. People died who didn't need to. He met her gaze directly. I can't undo that, but I can choose differently now. Before Ilera could respond, the door slid open and Mira entered with a small case. Good news and bad news, she announced. Good news is I have a ship that can get you off-world, untraceable. Bad news is collectors have locked down all standard departure channels. You'll need to launch from the old mining platform in the northern wastes. That's 30 kilometers through rough country, Kalen frowned. Hence the case of supplies, Mira replied, setting it down. Transport will draw attention. You'll have to go on foot, at least until you clear the settlement boundary. What are these hunters? Ilera asked. They're deploying search parties as we speak. Professional trackers, combat drones. They're offering a reward that's drawn every mercenary on Krell into the hunt. Myra's enhanced eyes fixed on Ilera. They want you intact, but the genetic material is the true prize. They'll take you dead if necessary. Ilera's scales rippled with fear, but her voice remained steady. When do we leave? Now, Kalen said. The longer we stay, the tighter their net gets. Mira provided them with essentials. Terrain-appropriate clothing for Ilera, weapons with fresh charges, ration packs, and most importantly, a scrambler that would mask their biosigns from standard scanners. She also uploaded detailed maps of the route to Kalen's portable terminal. The ship will wait 26 hours, Mira said as they prepared to leave through a service tunnel that ran beneath her shop. After that, they'll have to abandon position. We'll make it, Kalen assured her. Mira caught his arm as he turned to go. The collectors aren't the only ones after her, Kale. Your former client, I ran a trace on the transmission signal. It bounced through a dozen relays, but the origin was a hegemony intelligence facility. Kalen felt his blood run cold. The hegemony, the losing side in the war he'd fought in, was supposed to be demilitarized under the peace accords. If they were operating covertly, trying to acquire forgotten technologies. Thanks for the warning, he said grimly. Watch your back, Mira replied. She looked at Ilera. The Levi were revered among my ancestors. They believe your kind held the secrets of life itself. Ilera inclined her head slightly. Some secrets are best remembered only when needed. With those cryptic words, they slipped into the tunnel and began their journey toward the northern wastes. The landscape beyond Xylos' crowded structures transformed rapidly from cluttered urban sprawl to the harsh, broken terrain that characterized most of Krell's surface. Jagged rock formations thrust upward like the spines of some vast petrified beast, while narrow ravines cut through the land, remnants of ancient waterways long dried. Kalen set a grueling pace, knowing that each minute increased the search radius their pursuers would establish. Ilera kept up without complaint, her natural agility evident as she navigated the difficult terrain. Occasionally, her scales would shift to match the surrounding rocks, a Xylosian adaptation that served as both camouflage and temperature regulation. They will track us, she said after several hours of near-silent travel. The collectors have ways of sensing and Levi. Our energy signature differs. The scrambler should help with that, Kalen replied, though uncertainty crept into his voice. How much do you know about them? The collectors. Ilera was quiet for several steps before responding. They came to our sanctuary world after the burning of our home, pretended to offer help. Her scales darkened with the memory. They studied us while appearing to provide aid. Then they began selecting individuals for specialized treatment. Those taken never returned. How did you escape? I didn't. I was chosen. Her voice grew softer. But the transport carrying us was attacked by raiders. In the chaos, I fled, hid in a cargo container that was eventually salvaged by scavengers. She looked at him. The rest you know. Kalen's mind raced with implications. If the collectors had already studied other in Levi, they might have partial knowledge of what Alara carried within her genetic code. That would make them even more dangerous. They'd know exactly what they were looking for. Your markings, he said, nodding toward her shoulder. They're not just identification, are they? Alara hesitated before answering. They are. Instructions. A key to unlock what lies dormant. And what exactly is that? She stopped walking, fixing him with those amber eyes. Life. Death. Healing. Destruction. The Levi were tasked with preserving balance. Knowledge that could restore or devastate, depending on who wielded it and how. The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Kalen had suspected the stakes were high, but this confirmation made their desperate flight across Krell's hostile landscape feel even more critical. Their conversation halted as Kalen's scanner picked up movement ahead. He signaled Alara to take cover behind a large rock formation while he crawled forward to assess the threat. Through his tactical scope, he observed a collector search team, 4 operatives in advanced environmental suits, and 2 tracking drones moving in a precise search. Pattern. They've gotten ahead of us somehow, he whispered when he returned to Alara's position. We'll need a detour east through the Razorlands. Alara's scales paled. Few survive those paths. Exactly why they might not follow. He checked the map. It'll add hours to our journey, but a distant explosion cut him off, the ground trembling beneath them. Looking back toward Xylos, they saw smoke rising from the distant settlement. A diversion? Alara wondered. Kalen shook his head. Or someone eliminating loose ends. His thoughts went to Mira, but he pushed the worry aside. She was a survivor. She would have contingencies. They altered course, heading into the area locals called the Razorlands, a maze of knife-sharp rock formations created by some ancient seismic event. The paths through were treacherous, barely wide enough for one person in many places, with edges that could slice through standard footwear on contact. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped dramatically, another of Krell's survival challenges. They found shelter in a small cave, its entrance nearly invisible among the razor rocks. Kalen set up minimal camp, no fire that might be detected, just thermal blankets and cold rations. Rest, he told Alara. I'll take first watch. She settled nearby, wrapping the thermal blanket around herself. In the dim light of their single low-powered glow stick, her scales took on a deeper blue hue. What will happen, she asked softly, if we reach this ship? Where will we go? It was a question Kalen had been avoiding. His original plan had extended only as far as getting Alara off Krell. Beyond that, there are places, he said slowly, remote colonies, independent worlds where even the collectors have limited reach. We could find somewhere safe, at least temporarily. And then, he sighed. I don't know, Alara. The knowledge you carry, it's your heritage, your decision what to do with it. I just want to make sure you have the freedom to make that choice. She was quiet for so long that Kalen thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My clan elders said that knowledge is like water. Contained too tightly, it stagnates. Spilled carelessly, it is wasted. Shared wisely, it brings life. Her scales rippled with subtle patterns. I'm the vessel, but I cannot be sealed forever. The profound simplicity of her words struck Kalen deeply. He'd spent years recovering artifacts without much thought to their purpose beyond the payment they brought. Alara reminded him of what had drawn him to archaeology in the first place. The connection to something larger than himself, the continuity of knowledge across time. Get some sleep, he said gently. We have a long way to go tomorrow. As Alara drifted to sleep, Kalen found his gaze lingering on her. Something had awakened in him since finding her in that market. A sense of purpose he'd thought long extinguished by war and its aftermath. Whether they made it off Krell or not, he'd already been changed by her presence in his life. The night passed with tense vigilance, but no signs of pursuit disturbed their hideaway. When dawn broke, a brief, sharp transition on Krell, they quickly resumed their journey through the Razorlands. The path grew increasingly treacherous, forcing them to move slowly despite the urgency of their situation. Midday brought them to what appeared to be a dead end, a sheer wall of black stone blocking the path. Kalen consulted his map with growing concern. "There should be a passage here," he muttered, scanning the rock face. Alara stepped forward, her head tilted as if listening. Without explanation, she placed her hand against the stone and closed her eyes. Her scales shifted through a sequence of blues and greens in a pattern Kalen hadn't seen before. "There," she said, pointing to a narrow crack that seemed no different from dozens of others scoring the wall. "You're sure?" Instead of answering, she simply slipped sideways into the crack, which proved wider than it appeared from their angle. Kalen followed, finding himself in a twisting passage barely wide enough for his shoulders. "How did you know?" he asked as they emerged on the other side, back on their planned route. Alara's scales rippled in what he was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of shrug. "The stones remember water paths. I felt it." Before Kalen could press for clarification, his scanner emitted a warning tone. He quickly silenced it, but the alert was clear, multiple signals approaching rapidly from the direction they had come. "They found our trail," he said grimly. They increased their pace, the mining platform now less than 10 kilometers away according to the map. But the rough terrain slowed them, and Kalen's scanner continued to show their pursuers gaining ground. "We need to split up," Alara suddenly announced. "Absolutely not," Kalen replied without hesitation. "I can move faster alone," she insisted. "My body is adapted to this environment, and they want me, not you. That's precisely why I'm not letting you go alone." "Kalen," she said, using his name for the first time with such direct intensity that he stopped short. "You have done more for me than anyone since my clan was taken, but I will not be the cause of your death." Before he could argue further, the distant whine of aerial drones reached them. They were out of time. "There," Kalen pointed to a deep fissure ahead. "That ravine leads toward the platform. It'll provide cover from air surveillance." They slid down into the ravine, a steep-sided crack in Krell's surface that dropped nearly 15 meters to a dry, rocky bottom. The narrow space above allowed only a sliver of sky to be visible, shielding them from immediate detection. They moved as quickly as the difficult terrain allowed, occasionally forced to climb over massive boulders that had fallen into the ravine. The sound of drones became intermittent. They were searching patterns, not yet having located their exact position. After an hour in the ravine, Kalen's scanner indicated they were within 5 kilometers of the mining platform. Hope began to build. They might actually make it. That hope was shattered by the sound of falling rocks ahead. Rounding a bend in the ravine, they came face to face with a collector search team, 4 operatives in full tactical gear, descending into the ravine from above. "Run!" Kalen shouted, drawing his weapon and firing at the descending figures. One shot connected, sending a collector tumbling to the ravine floor with a sickening impact. But the others took cover and returned fire, energy bolts scorching the stone around them. Alara turned to flee back the way they had come, but Kalen grabbed her arm. "Not that way," he said urgently. "Up." He pointed to a narrow side crevice that angled upward. They scrambled into the crevice as weapons fire intensified. The climbing was treacherous, loose stones giving way under their hands and feet. A bolt of energy struck the rock near Alara's head, showering her with stinging fragments, but she continued upward without faltering. When they emerged onto the surface, Kalen oriented himself quickly. "The platform is northeast, just beyond that ridge. Run for it. Don't stop for anything." They sprinted across the open terrain, painfully exposed. Aerial drones appeared on the horizon, closing rapidly. Kalen fired backward periodically, more to slow their pursuers than with any hope of hitting them at this distance. The ridge loomed ahead, a final barrier between them and their destination. As they began to climb, a shot from one of the drones struck Kalen in the back, sending him sprawling against the rocky slope. "Kalen!" Alara cried, turning back to him. "Keep going," he gasped, the wound burning like fire across his shoulders. His armor had absorbed the worst of it, but the impact had still been devastating. Alara ignored his command, returning to help him to his feet. With her supporting him, they continued upward, each step agonizing for Kalen. The drones circled closer, preparing for another attack run. They crested the ridge just as two more collector teams converged from different directions. Below them, the ancient mining platform stretched across a vast crater, a relic of Krell's industrial past. At its center stood their salvation, a small, nondescript ship with engines already cycling for launch. "They're cutting us off from the platform access," Kalen observed, watching the collectors establish a perimeter. Pain clouded his thoughts, but one desperate option presented itself. "We'll have to go down the cliff face. It's the only approach they haven't covered." Alara looked at the sheer drop with concern. "You cannot climb in your condition." "No choice," Kalen replied, checking his weapon's remaining charge, just enough for limited covering fire. As they prepared to descend, a new sound cut through the air, the distinctive whine of a military-grade transport approaching fast. Looking up, they saw a sleek, black vessel bearing hegemony markings despite the supposed ban on their presence in this sector. "Your former client has arrived," Alara observed quietly. "This just keeps getting better," Kalen muttered. With collectors below and hegemony forces above, they were effectively trapped on the ridge. The black ship hovered overhead, its weapons systems targeting the collector teams below. A standoff was developing, neither force willing to allow the other to claim Alara. Kalen made a quick decision. "They're distracted. This is our chance." He activated his scanner's communication function, bypassing security to send a direct signal to the ship waiting on the platform. "Myra's pilot. Coming in hot. Southeast cliff face. Need extraction." A tense moment passed before a response came. "Acknowledged. Prepare for pickup in 3 minutes." The ship on the platform powered up fully, its engines glowing with increasing intensity. The noise drew attention from both the collectors and the hegemony vessel, temporarily diverting their focus. "Now," Kalen urged, and they began a controlled slide down the steep cliff face, using natural handholds where possible, but mostly relying on gravity and desperate hope. Halfway down, the first shots from above began striking the cliff around them. The hegemony had spotted their escape attempt. Rocks dislodged by the energy blast cascaded around them, adding to the peril of their descent. Kalen's injured back screamed in protest with every movement, but adrenaline carried him forward. Alara moved with surprising grace despite the treacherous conditions, her natural agility evident even in this extreme situation. Near the bottom, a larger blast struck too close, breaking away the section of cliff face Kalen clung to. He fell the remaining distance, landing hard on the rocky ground below. Pain exploded through his body, his vision narrowing to a dark tunnel. Through it, he saw Alara land beside him, then lean over him with concern evident in her rapidly shifting scales. "Get up," she urged, pulling at him. "Please, Kalen. The ship comes." Indeed, their extraction vessel had lifted from the platform and was now skimming toward their position, flying dangerously low to avoid the weapons of the hegemony craft. The collectors, seeing their prize about to escape, began converging on their position from multiple directions. With Alara's help, Kalen managed to stand, though he could feel blood soaking the back of his shirt. Together they staggered toward the approaching ship, which was now receiving fire from both pursuing forces. The ship settled briefly on the rough ground, its entry ramp extending. Alara helped Kalen up the ramp, energy bolts striking all around them. As they collapsed inside, the ramp closed and the ship immediately powered upward, executing evasive maneuvers that threw them against the bulkhead. "Hang on back there," called a voice from the cockpit. "This is going to get rough." The ship accelerated hard, pressing them into the deck as it climbed toward Krell's upper atmosphere. Warning alarms sounded throughout the vessel, indicating pursuit and weapons lock. Kalen felt consciousness slipping away as pain and blood loss took their toll. The last thing he saw was Alara leaning over him, her scales a brilliant, determined blue as her hands pressed against his wound with surprising strength. Then darkness claimed him. Consciousness returned to Kalen in fragments. The hum of medical equipment, the antiseptic smell of a ship's med bay, the distant vibration of engines at cruising power. When he finally managed to open his eyes, he found himself lying face down on a treatment bed, a regeneration unit working on the wound across his back. "You have a remarkable constitution for a human," came Ilara's voice. The medical system predicted 2 more days of unconsciousness. Kalen turned his head carefully to see her sitting nearby. She looked transformed, clean, rested, wearing properly fitted clothing that complemented her blue scales. Most strikingly, she appeared more at ease, her posture no longer defensive. "How long?" he managed to ask, his throat dry. 3 days since Krell," she replied, offering him water through a straw. "We are beyond track space now, in what your pilot calls the quiet sectors." As his mind cleared, questions flooded in. The ship? The collectors? The hegemony? "This vessel is called Whisper Sister. It escaped pursuit using technology one do not understand, something that bent space around us." She paused. "Your friend Mira did not survive the diversion explosion in Xylos. The pilot says she activated protocols to ensure the ship would still be waiting for us. She called it her final contingency." Grief washed over Kalen. Mira had survived the war, survived years on Krell, only to die helping them escape. Another debt he could never repay. "The pilot's name is Tarek," Ilara continued. "He says he owes you from something called the Verindi operation. He will take us wherever we wish to go, though he recommends a place called New Sanctuary." "Never heard of it," Kalen murmured. "It is a hidden colony, established by those fleeing persecution or those with knowledge too dangerous for the Central Worlds." Her scales rippled with subtle patterns. "Tara believes they would welcome an Levi." The regeneration unit beeped as it completed its work, the pain in Kalen's back receding to a dull ache. With Ilara's help, he managed to sit up, feeling the pull of newly formed skin across his shoulders. "You saved my life," he said, meeting her amber eyes. "On the cliff and after. The medical logs show you stabilized me before the ship's systems could activate." Ilara's scales shifted to a deeper blue. "I accessed certain knowledge, dormant abilities of my people. I could feel the damage in your body and redirect energy to contain it." She looked down at her hands. "It was the first time I had ever attempted such healing." The implications were enormous. If Ilara could heal injuries through some biological mechanism encoded in her genetics, it was no wonder the collectors and hegemony had been so determined to capture her. Such abilities could revolutionize medicine, or be weaponized for devastating effect. "That's why they want you so badly," Kalen said softly. "One small part of what the Levi preserved," she replied. "There is much more. Knowledge of ecological restoration, biological defenses against engineered pathogens, methods to enhance agricultural yield in hostile environments." She hesitated. "And yes, applications that could harm if misused. The balance my ancestors maintained has been lost in these times." Kalen considered the path ahead. He had no home to return to, no ties except the mercenary work he'd grown increasingly dissatisfied with. His original mission was abandoned, his client revealed as an enemy. In many ways, he was as adrift as Ilara had been when he found her in that market. "This new sanctuary," he said slowly. "Would they accept both of us?" Ilara's scales brightened. "You would come with me?" "If you'll have me," Kalen replied. "Someone needs to watch your back. And," he faltered slightly, "I think I still have something to offer. My knowledge of ancient cultures, maybe even help understanding your own heritage." "I would welcome your company," she said, formal words contradicted by the joyful ripple of color across her scales. 2 weeks later, Whisper Sister approached the hidden coordinates of New Sanctuary, a small, terrestrial world orbiting a red dwarf star, concealed within a dense asteroid field that discouraged casual visitors. Their approach was challenged by automated defense systems, and then by live operators suspicious of any newcomers. Tarek, experienced in such negotiations, transmitted their credentials, including the recognition codes Mira had provided and, crucially, a genetic scan confirming Ilara's and Levi lineage. The latter caused visible excitement among the colony's leadership, who quickly granted permission to land. New Sanctuary proved to be a marvel of adaptation, a colony built within and around the natural features of the planet rather than dominating them. Buildings were constructed into the sides of cliffs or grew living from specially cultivated plants. Technology existed in abundance, but was designed to work in harmony with the world's ecosystem. They were met by the colony's council, a diverse group representing various refugee populations who had found home here. Among them was an elderly Xyloshan whose scales had faded to pale aqua with age. When he saw Ilara, he froze in apparent shock. "On Levi," he whispered, reading her markings. "After all these cycles, we believed none survived." Ilara inclined her head respectfully. "I am Ilara, last daughter of the seventh line." The old Xyloshan trembled visibly. "I am Jorin, once apprentice to the Levi. I was away from our sanctuary when the burning came. I did not know any escaped." "None did," Ilara said softly. "I was taken by those who brought the fire. Later, I escaped when they transported me." Understanding passed between them, a shared grief and history that needed no further explanation in that moment. "You must be weary from your journey," said another council member, a human woman with intricate tattoos covering her visible skin. "Quarters have been prepared for you both. Tomorrow, we will discuss your future here, if you wish to stay." As they followed their guide through the colony, Kaelin and Ilara walked side by side, occasionally catching each other's gaze. Without needing to speak, both understood they had found something precious, not just a safe haven, but a purpose, a place where Ilara's knowledge could be preserved and shared wisely, as her ancestors had intended. Their quarters overlooked a valley filled with bioluminescent plants that began to glow as darkness fell. Sitting together on a balcony carved from living stone, they watched the gentle light spread below them like a reflection of the stars above. "It feels like a dream," Ilara said. "A new beginning I never thought possible when I was in that market." Kaelin's hand found hers, a touch that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago when trust was fragile and fear constant. "The Levi believed knowledge was like water," he reminded her. "Here, perhaps it can flow again." Ilara's scales shifted to a luminous blue that matched the plants below. "And we will ensure it brings life, not destruction." The scars of their journey, both physical and emotional, remained, but like Kaelin's healing back, they were fading, giving way to new growth. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, guardians of a heritage too precious to be lost and too powerful to be misused. In the soft glow of alien plants beneath an unfamiliar sky, they had found not just sanctuary, but home.